and the back table there in front of the sound booth, okay? Genesis chapter 32. Genesis chapter 32, David already prayed. I'm going to read the text and then we'll begin, okay? Genesis chapter 32, we're going to look at verses 24 through 32. Genesis 32, verse 24. Then Jacob was left alone. You know what? Hold on. Stop. Stop the car. Let's start in verse 22 because that's really where the text picks up. Verse 22. Now he arose that same night and took his 2 wives and his 2 maids and his 11 children and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and he sent across whatever he had. Then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he touched the socket of his thigh. So the socket of Jacob's thigh was dislocated while he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." But he said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." He said, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him and said, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And he blessed him there. So Jacob named that place Peniel, for he said, "I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been preserved." Now the sun rose upon him just as he crossed over Peniel, and he was limping on his thigh. Therefore, to this day, the sons of Israel do not eat the sinew of the hip, which is on the socket of the thigh, because he touched the socket of Jacob's thigh in the sinew of the hip. Genesis 32 is really a pivotal chapter so far as Jacob's life is concerned. I believe he's vastly a different man from the person we have come to know in the previous chapters. And I just want to ask you a personal question. You can think about this. Has there been sin in your life that you have struggled with, you have manipulated, you have not really trusted in God, and you've never really dealt with it? And then there came a point in your life where you finally said, "You know what? I have really got to deal with this sin once and for all. It has been nagging me. It has been a stumbling block in my life. Remember we talked about this morning, we kind of massage the eye, we kind of pet the eye, we don't gouge it out like Jesus says. And there comes a point in your life where you gouge it out. And you deal with it, and you look back at that and say, that was a huge stepping stone in my life as far as my sanctification is concerned. I believe that this is a moment for Jacob like this. Because the preoccupation which obsesses Jacob is he's facing his brother. He did something wrong to his brother. And in the back of his mind, it's just haunting him. And he remembers it. He's afraid of his brother. Okay? And so, remember, he deceptively obtained the birthright of the blessing of his father, which the results were consistent with the revealed will of God. The means employed, though, were not pleasing to him. The result was Jacob offended his brother. In fact, that's seen in Proverbs 18:19. A brother offended is harder to be won than a strong city. And contentions are like the bars of a citadel. Meaning he knew he offended his brother and it's still haunting him. He's like, you got to remember, his mom said, "Get away for a few days, Jacob." Well, that few days turned into 20 years. Think about that. You don't reconcile with your brother. Some of you may have this even in your own families. You don't reconcile with a family member, and you haven't seen them for a long time, and you're going to see them over Christmas, or you're going to see them at a reunion. You're like, "Oh man, I remember the last time what happened." It's still haunting you. It's haunting them. And that's the situation here. So it had been 20 years had passed, so far as we are told, and he had never heard from his mother. That must have led Jacob to conclude that Esau still harbored possibly a grudge against him. And so Jacob, he has good reason to fear the confrontation that might come from his brother. He's scared to death. He was terrified. And we see how he's terrified because earlier on he sends ahead some elaborate gifts. You know, here goes Jacob trying to manipulate, trying to buy him off, not trust in God. Hey, I'll send him a whole bunch of my sheep and oxen. Maybe that'll cool his temper down. So from a divine standpoint, the view of chapter 32, it's a huge turning point in Jacob's spiritual life. Jacob had always been a bargainer, even with God. Even we see this. Remember Jacob's ladder in Genesis 28? After the vision of the heavenly ladder, Jacob made this vow. But you look at that vow, and it's kind of like, that kind of looks like a bargain with God. Let's look at it. It's possible it's a bargain with God. Look at Genesis 28, verses 20 through 22. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will keep me on this journey that I take, and will give me food to eat and garments to wear, and I return to my father's house in safety, then the Lord will be my God. If God does this, and this, then he'll be my God. It kind of sounds like a bargain, doesn't it? Then in verse 22, this stone which I have set up as a pillar will be God's house, and of all that you give me, I will surely give a tenth to you. So even in Genesis chapter 28, it seems like he's bargaining with God. And in return for God's presence, protection, and provision, Jacob would let God be his God. If you do this, then I'll go ahead and let you be my God. And don't people sometimes dream of a God in their own mind? Well, my God would be like this. If there was a God, then he would do this, and he wouldn't do that, and he wouldn't bring suffering, and he wouldn't allow that to happen. He wouldn't allow that to happen. That's my God. Nothing's new under the sun, right? And so all of Jacob's deceitful practices, which we have seen over the years of his life, are the result of a fundamental misconception. Jacob felt this, that spiritual blessings, when spiritual blessings come, they're to be secured by carnal methods, like try to manipulate to get something, try to bargain with God or with someone to get something. Jacob rightly believed that God had promised to make him, not Esau, the heir of promise with the rights of the firstborn. He valued that blessing, while Esau, he despised it. But he didn't know something. This is really important for us to know. He didn't yet know or come to understand or believe that he didn't have to connive, manipulate, scheme in order to receive the blessings from God. It's no different today. How many people do you think are working for their salvation? How many people do you think that are unbelievers are working for their salvation? I would say probably 99%. Because the first thing they say is, I am doing this. I do this. Instead of, I believe in the finished work of Christ. He has done it for me. And so the encounter which Jacob will have with this, really it's angel of Jehovah, it's the pre-incarnate Christ, is going to correct his error and will instruct Jacob as to how and why spiritual blessings must be obtained through spiritual means by trusting in God and God alone. So we see this man wrestles with Jacob. So come back to Genesis 32, if you would. So as what happens in the night, Jacob, he sends his family, everything ahead of him, okay? He sends everyone ahead. He sent them across whatever he had, all his belongings and all his family. And in verse 24, Jacob was left alone, right? And a man wrestled with him until daybreak, okay? So it's dark, and all Jacob can say about the visitor is that he's a man. At least we know that right here. The visitor doesn't appear simply just to meet Jacob, though. He appears to do what? to fight him. The text says to wrestle him. Think about this. Who is Jacob worried about wrestling, perhaps? His brother. Kind of ironic, is it not? So Jacob is worried about meeting his brother Esau, but he has more than he can handle with this character before he meets, or you can say fights, if you will. And so the Lord is going to teach him something here. So who's the aggressor? I believe the man is the aggressor. Or we can say the pre-incarnate Christ is the aggressor. God is the aggressor. Jacob is really defending himself here. Some preachers say this, well, Jacob, he just wrestled all night with God in prayer. That's not what the text says. Just read what the text says. He wrestled with him. That's what happens. It's amazing how many things you get out of this text wrong sometimes. So God was in control here. He approached Jacob. Jacob has sent everything ahead of him, and he has no weapon to defend himself. However, neither does the visitor have a weapon that we know of. If the visitor were intent on killing him, it seemed that he would have maybe armed himself. The contest is what? It's a long one. It says it goes till daybreak. Do you see that in the text? So you kind of wonder, like you read this, like this is weird. You know what I mean? It's kind of mystery. It's like, what's going on here? What's this guy up to? What's this man up to that's doing this? You know, you might think, well, the match is even. Jacob was a man of great strength. We see that in Genesis 29:10. He rolls a stone away. The narrator now gives us the perspective of the visitor who saw that he had not prevailed against Jacob. The visitor, therefore, dislocates the socket of Jacob's thigh. And he does so with a mere touch. That shows you something. He just touches his thigh. Okay, it might not just be a man. That's your first key. This isn't no ordinary guy come to wrestle Jacob. And so this raised some question. Who is this man? What kind of power does this guy have? If he has the power, why didn't he just use it earlier? Why doesn't he just simply defeat Jacob instead of wrestling him in some type of a draw here? Why doesn't he maybe just kill Jacob if he wants to do that? We know that Jacob was a man of strength, but listen, he's injured in a critical area while he's wrestling. If he survives this encounter, it would make him vulnerable for his confrontation with Esau. If this man is powerful enough to injure Jacob with a simple touch, he's probably powerful enough to do anything he wants with him. He's also powerful enough to free himself if he wants to. So that tells you this guy is no ordinary guy. This guy is just not the state champion 6A of Kansas. Okay? Nevertheless, he asked Jacob to release him. That seems odd. The reason given for this request is that dawn is breaking. That's what he says. Hey, dawn's breaking. I want to quit. I'm done wrestling. Okay? The daylight would reveal more of the visitor than he maybe wants to know at the time. So he said, hey, daybreak's coming. I want to stop. Match over. And so Jacob realized that he's met his match. He knows he's in the presence of a superior foe, perhaps a messenger of God's of some kind. We don't know, but we do know this. Remember, Jacob has had previous encounters of angels, right? We saw that in Genesis 28:12 and Genesis 32:2. So he's hobbled. He's hobbled, but it's like you read the text, he's hanging on to him. You know? He's hanging on to him. And so why is he hanging on to him, though? Look at the text. He says in verse 26, then he said, let me go, for the dawn is breaking. But Jacob says, I will not let you go unless you bless me. So he's hanging on because he wants to be blessed. So Jacob somehow, some way, has figured out this is not an ordinary guy who wants to wrestle. And so we know that this man, verse 24 says the man is really an angel. Okay, if we were to turn, you can just jot this down if you're taking notes. Hosea 12, verses 3 and 4 refer to this. Hosea 12, verses 3 and 4, and I'll read that for you, okay, out loud. In the womb, he took his brother by the heel And in his maturity, he contended with God. Yes, he wrestled with the angel. He wrestled with the angel and prevailed. He wept and sought his favor. He found him at Bethel, and there he spoke with us. So there it tells us that this person's not just a man now. He's an angel. And so more than just an angel, this person was the angel of Jehovah, the pre-incarnate Son of God, who appeared in human flesh. And how do we know that Jacob knows this? How do we know that Jacob, not that he would know that this is a pre-incarnate Son of God, but he knows that this is God? Look with me in verse 30. Verse 30. So Jacob named the place Peniel, for he said, I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been preserved. So we go from a man, Hosea says an angel, to Jacob now realizing this was God. I was just wrestling with God. Okay, that's really important to understand that. And by the way, this struggle isn't a dream. It's not like a bad nightmare that Jacob woke up from. He wrestles with God. That's what it says. I mean, no man has had just a dream and then woken up with a really, 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 really bad limp for the rest of his life. Okay? So it was a struggle which God himself initiated. I think that's important. Who initiated this whole deal? Jacob doesn't go find this man. This man comes to Jacob. It says in verse 24, then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. So Jacob, he would have been mistaken if he thought that Esau was the barrier entrance to Canaan, right? Think about this, you guys. Think about this. What is Jacob consumed with? He's consumed with, man, I just wonder if my brother, like, what he's going to do to me. Don't we have situations like that? I wonder what's going to happen tomorrow. I wonder what happens if I invite my next door neighbor, if they'll never talk to me again. We all have all these situations like this. So Jacob is thinking, I wonder what Esau is going to do to me. That's what he's thinking. In this wrestling match, it was not Esau who opposed Jacob, but you know who it was? It was God. So this is what's happening. Jacob, take your eyes off Esau and be consumed with me. Your focus is on your brother. Your focus is on your circumstance, Jacob. That's what's happening here. And we must marvel at Moses' report that the angel had not prevailed against Jacob. Think about this. Jacob's perhaps about 100 years old. How could it be that God did not prevail against Jacob? How does that work out? 100-year-old guy seems probably a little frail and weak to me, right? I think it must be pointed out that Moses, he does not tell us that God could not overcome Jacob, right? The text doesn't say that, only that he did not. And so at this point, the angel disabled Jacob by dislocating him in his hip. Hey, believe you me, my brother wrestled a little bit. I'll never forget one match I saw. He wasn't wrestling a guy, but it was over on the other mat. And at this wrestling tournament, my brother was a sophomore, and there's two sophomores wrestling, and I'll never forget that the guy broke his arm. And what do you think that wrestler who had his arm broken was? What you would say he's pretty disabled, right? That's what happens here. So that would be devastating to a wrestler. It would be like breaking the arm of a quarterback or the leg of a running back. Jacob was now unable to wage an offensive battle. And so what is he? He's helpless. And all he can do is like cling in desperation. And after he dislocates his socket, he just clings to him. He clings to him and he wants a blessing. Now think about this. Think about Esau, because Esau was on his mind. Esau could neither provide nor prevent the blessing of God. It was not Esau that stood in the way of Jacob's blessing in the land of Canaan. On the other hand, it's God. It's God who promised you the blessing. It's God who take care of Esau. And so the blessing of God must be obtained from God himself, and this must be done by clinging to him in a helpless dependence. And that's where Jacob is. Jacob can't manipulate anymore. He's been humbled. This is the picture which is conveyed by this struggle in the night hours between Jacob and his God. A realization of this fact brought about a dramatic change in the character of Jacob. And thus, his name was changed. Verse 28. And he said, remember, he wants to know, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. This is really important. I know if someone asks you your name at Walmart or whatever, you say Tim or you say your name. You know, our names don't have much meaning behind them, right? You introduce someone, you just want to like, okay, I want to remember their name so when I see him next time, hi, Tim. Totally different thing in the Hebrew culture. Totally different thing. The visitor asks a question that takes Jacob on a tour of his life. He says, what is your name? Think about it. You remember the last time that Jacob was asked his name? His dad asked him what his name was. And he lied then. He said, I'm Esau. And now he's asked, what's your name? Because what does Jacob's name mean? He said, what is your name? He said it. He said, I'm Jacob, which it would be like saying this. I'm a supplanter, I'm a deceiver, I'm a manipulator. That's who I am. And he said it. He said it. He said who he was. He was humbled by God. You know, sometimes you're sharing the gospel with people and they'll say, hey, do you believe you're a sinner? And they'll go, yeah, I believe I'm a sinner. And you go, no, really, do you believe you're really a sinner? And they'll go, well, yeah. And they kind of come out like this, well, I'm a good sinner. What do you mean a good sinner? And then they explain it like this, well, I've never really done this. Like, I've never killed anybody. I try to obey the 10 Commandments. I've never robbed a bank. And they go through all these things. So what are they trying to do? They're trying to justify themselves and really say, I'm not a really bad sinner. Listen, the Bible says in James, if you've sinned once, you've broken all the commandments. And Jacob here, I really believe here, he admits who he really is before God. And that's what you have to do. You really have to admit who you are before God in order to be saved. He says, I'm a heel grabber. Out of the womb, that's what I am. I'm a supplanter, I'm a deceiver. And he's been true to his name, hasn't he, with his dealings with Esau and Isaac and Laban? And that's why I said he didn't admit his name when he sought the blessing for the first time. His father asked him, who are you, my son? Jacob answers, I'm Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Get up, please, sit, eat of my game, that you may bless me. He lied. Not here. Not here, he doesn't. So how does he answer this time? Jacob, who used to be a multiple clever of words, manipulate people of the world, including his father, and the last time he sought a blessing, answers only with one word, I'm Jacob. That was a big deal. I think this is where he confesses. Do you remember at the very beginning of my sermon I said, is there something in your life where you haven't dealt with? I believe this is a major turning point for Jacob. And maybe there's some sin tonight that you guys know, even from the sermon this morning, about that you're not presenting the members of your body as instruments of righteousness, but you're presenting them still, and you're enslaved to sin in those areas. You got to deal with them, guys. You got to just deal with them. This is a moment for Jacob. We all have these moments, right? We all have these moments. We got to deal with sin in our life. And here I think you see a different Jacob. I think God just holds up a mirror in Jacob's face when he has to say Jacob. And I just think he sees deceiver, I'm a manipulator, I'm a conniver. That's me. I think that's what happens here. There's a different Jacob. Jacob who hid behind the animal skins to get a blessing from his father. Remember that? We just read that. And even moments ago, he sent a gift ahead to protect himself from his brother. Hey, maybe I'll manipulate and send him some gifts. And he'll be like, oh, I love Jacob now. He'll keep sending me gifts. This Jacob, he answers with his name. I'm Jacob, the deceiver. And if he's going to seek a blessing, he will seek it by being himself and admitting his flaws. I am Jacob, yes, I am the heel grabber, I'm the supplanter, I'm a deceiver, and that's who I am. And when you guys recognize your sinfulness, doesn't Paul say, when I am weak, then I am strong? When I realize and face and confess my sins, that's when I am made strong. That's what happens to Jacob right here. Right here. We see verse 28, a new name for Jacob. Do you see it? Not only does he bless him, but he gives him a new name. He says, your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel. For you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. This visitor responds by giving Jacob more than a blessing. He gives him a new name, Israel. And do you know what Israel means? To strive. The visitor connects the name with Jacob's contentious nature. Jacob has striven with God and with men. And so Jacob's struggle with men, think about Esau, Isaac, Laban. It's been so evident. And his struggle with God has been less evident. Think about this. Think about this. What did Jacob think his problem was? My brother. My brother. As soon as I get him out of the way, then it's okay. And don't we think like that? As soon as this problem goes away, but you're not dealing with God in the problem. That's not the problem, to get your circumstance out of the way. The problem is to deal with God in the problem. Look to God. And so Jacob did prevail with God and in his wrestling match. Although in many ways, he did not really overcome God, right? He didn't overcome God. So don't think when you read this, he didn't overcome God, because what did God do? Hey, let me just touch your hip there. Touch, dislocation, right? And so his only act was to cling tenaciously to the angel of Jehovah. And in the words of Hosea, listen to Hosea. Hosea shed some light on this, you guys. Hosea 12, it says this. He wept and sought his favor. That helps. He wept and sought his favor. In this sense, alone, God was overcome by Jacob. In this same way, we who are his children and heirs of blessings, we can prevail with God. When what? When we seek him, seek his favor, and confess before him and weep. So having prevailed with God, Jacob was assured of victory no matter what opposition came. Even your brother Jacob. Even your brother Esau, I'm sorry. So this certainly and specifically included Esau. You guys, it's no different. It's no different than Romans 8. We just got done going through that. If God is for us, who's against us? What can separate us from the love of God? Same thing that Jacob's learning right here. You're so focused on your circumstance. You're so focused on the event. You want the event to go away, Tim. You want the circumstance to go away. Then you think everyone will be okay, and you'll be okay. No, it's not true. God may keep that circumstance, that event in your life, so you look to God. Think about Jacob's greatest defeat. His greatest defeat was his greatest victory. Think about sometimes how our greatest victories come out of the ashes of our greatest defeats. Jacob had striven with God and with men and had been wounded, but the wound was his final lesson that taught him to answer, Who are you? I'm Jacob. I'm the deceiver. The wound had also taught him to hold on and ask for a blessing. Here's an extraordinary trust. Think about this, you guys. Think about this. Jacob clings to someone who really has the power to kill him. And he asks for a blessing. And it starts off with this man just came out of nowhere, wants to wrestle with him. What happens with Jacob's brother Esau? Remember we talked about this probably several months ago? Jacob's view of God just goes like this. His view of his brother Esau goes like this. He's got a high view of God and a low view of man, a proper view of man. That's what happens here. Jacob gets a new name. He gets a new name, Israel. You see it? He has been transformed into the father of a nation, the nation of Israel, the nation that will save all the other nations. This is Genesis 12:3. The name Israel evokes Jacob's injury. It would be a reminder to him that his strength would be in his weakness, which he taught him dependence. Then the visitor blesses Jacob. He blesses Jacob. Do we see this in verses 29 and 30? Then Jacob asked him, he said, please tell me your name. But he said, why is it that you ask my name? And he blessed him there. So Jacob named that place Peniel, for he said, I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been preserved. I mean, who's this strange visitor that just wrestled with me? Jacob wants to know, please tell me your name. The man only refuses to answer the question. He doesn't answer the question, does he? He doesn't answer the question. The man who wrestled with Jacob then seems to be saying this, don't you know who I am? Jacob realizes then who it really is. It's God. It's pre-incarnate Christ as we would see it. Jacob may be asking the name of the visitor because he wants to offer him a blessing in return. That's what they did back then, you know. Hey, you give me a blessing, I'll give you one. But the man was not there to receive a blessing. Or I can say God was not there to receive a blessing, only to give a blessing. And God grants Jacob the blessing he sought, but it becomes anticlimactic after the name change. And the narrator says nothing about the content of the blessing. Notice that the place of the blessing becomes more important than the context. And he blessed him there. That's what it says in the text, blessed him there. God blessed Jacob in the place where he wounded him. So for Jacob, the place of wounding becomes really the place of blessing. Jacob had been blessed and named by God. Jacob, however, cannot bless God, much less than him. But he can name the place where he wrestled with God, so he names that place. Remember 20 years ago in the story, Jacob named the place where he encountered God at Bethel, which means house of God. This place he names it Peniel, or Penuel, which means face of God. His reason for doing so is, I've seen the face of God, and I have lived. My life has been preserved. It's a new day for Jacob. It's a new day for Jacob. The narrator of the story reports a sunrise. Do you see that in verse 31? He reported a sunset in Genesis 28:11. And so sometimes here's some lessons that we can learn from this text. The place left a mark on him, didn't it? And Jews even know that to this day. God left a mark on him. He limps after this episode. Every step reminding him of what happened. Every step reminding him that he was weak, but therefore he was now dependent upon God. Into the reunion with Esau that he dreaded. He dreaded facing Esau. And now think about it. He's limping. He's maybe 100 years old. Well, how's he going to fight Esau? He's got God. He's got God. Doesn't matter if you limp or not. Think of the sons of Israel. Think of the nation of Israel. They would also be reminded of this place. They would commemorate Jacob's encounter with God by setting aside the hip of the animals that they ate. The nation would not only remember Jacob by this, it would identify with him. The nation of Israel would prevail by being wounded in the sense of a wounded nation, in the sense of they would have to depend upon God when they went into the land of Canaan. Some lessons that we can learn. I think they're vital to every Christian, to every believer. It's a transforming truth, for it explains the reason why God's blessings can only be obtained by godly means. It revealed to Jacob the reason why all of his previous victories, think about this, were really disasters. They resulted in discord, hatred, and hostility. And if Jacob's life in Canaan were to receive God's blessing, Jacob, you're going to have to learn to trust me. You're going to have to say who you really are and confess your sin and lean on me. Jacob's major obstacle was not Esau. Who was it? It was God. That's why God comes to him. And once God was with Jacob, victory is certain. And since our God is sovereign, no one can resist his will. Not Esau, not Pharaoh, not Assyria, not Babylon, not Rome, nor anyone. And so all of Jacob's life, if you think about it, up to Genesis 32, it's been characterized by carnal, striving, manipulating. And now Jacob has learned the folly and the futility of such effort. An entrance into a life of blessing will be achieved only on the same basis as Jacob secured the blessing of an angel Jehovah. By what? By clinging to God and to God alone for everything. Not just for salvation, but for everything, for your daily walk with God. This would have been a great lesson for the Israelites. Think about this. Think about this. Just think. The Israelites surely would have asked, where did our name come from? Where did we get our name from? Who's the guy that changed our name? They would have had to say, the deceiver, the manipulator, Jacob. Jacob's the guy that got our name. Oh yeah, sometimes we're like him. Sometimes we're like him. Read Exodus 23, 20 through 28. It's the same lesson for us. Our warfare is a spiritual one. It cannot be won by carnal means. You guys know Ephesians 6. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against powers, against world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual force of wickedness in heavenly places. Therefore, take up the full armor of God that you may be able to resist in the evil day, and having done everything, stand firm. Stand firm, therefore, having girded your loins with truth, and having put on the breastplate of righteousness, and having shod your feet with the preparation of the gospel of peace. In addition to all, taking up a shield of faith, with which you will be able to extinguish all the flaming missiles of the evil one. And take the helmet of salvation, the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. With all prayer and petition, pray at all times in the Spirit. And with this in view, be on the alert with all perseverance and petition for all the saints, and pray on my behalf that utterance may be given to me in the opening of my mouth, to make known with boldness the mystery of the gospel, for which I am ambassador in chains, that in proclaiming it I may speak boldly as I ought to speak. You know the great tragedy of believers today, and I think we can identify this, is so much of what we do, we want to get by carnal means. We want to manipulate. We want to not trust in God. We have plan B, C, D, E, F. Not plan A, which is trust God. No, we got the second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth plans. We employ these means because that is what we, by our old nature, are inclined to do. Just here's some Here's a couple encouraging things, hopefully to encourage you with as we close tonight. The very first thing that we need to do is come to your own inadequacy and to come to your own helplessness. You know, the world says the exact opposite. Be strong, man, be strong. The Bible says the exact opposite, doesn't it? We must come to the end of ourselves and recognize the futility of our own carnal devices. That's what happened to Jacob in Genesis 32. He could not resist Esau, nor could he even defeat the man who opposed him. He says, I'm helpless. I got a dislocated hip. I can't fight my brother. I got to trust in God. You know, sometimes we kind of think Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 is a cliche or kind of a nice saying you put on your fridge. It's not. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your what? Own understanding. I think that's where a lot of us carnally try to do that a lot in just the everyday stuff. I do anyway. Second, we got to trust what God has promised to do. Jacob did not prevail with God in some new and uncharted path. He prevailed with God in a matter about which God had repeatedly spoken. The blessings which he poured out on Jacob as the recipient of the blessings of the Abrahamic covenant. Jacob was called Israel, and Israel would be the nation in which the Messiah would come. And that pre-incarnate Christ, think about this, that pre-incarnate Christ, Philippians chapter 2, left heaven, became a man Christmas. Jacob was wrestling with the pre-incarnate Christ. He didn't know that. You know that. You know that. The Word of God was the only claim which Jacob had to trust in. And what did Jacob do? He clung tenaciously to God to accomplish what he promised to do, even when it seemed humanly possible, or even when his brother was in the back of his mind gnawing at him. You got an area? Seriously, you got an area where you're not trusting? We need to confess? Do you have an area where you know that you need to trust God in? You know that in that area you need to completely come to the end of yourself and be inadequate, weak. Could be an area, right? In your life. There is in mine. Confess it. Trust God. Learn some verses to encourage you. Let's pray together. Lord, when I first started studying this, I just thought this was kind of weird. A man comes and wrestles with Jacob. What's this all about? What's this for? Wrestling match? No, much bigger than that. Much bigger than that. I think we all can see ourselves like Jacob to some degree. Trusting in our plans, trusting in our ways. I'm adequate for all things. I'm sufficient, I need God for salvation. I need Jesus for the cross and for that. But the rest of my life, my day-to-day stuff, I kind of can do that just fine. I'm self-sufficient. There's a lot of areas, Lord, a lot of ways in which we do not trust you and lean upon you. We lean on our own understanding. So, Lord, I just pray that it could be some simple things. It could be a boss. It could be a coworker. It could be my family. It could be my children. It could be my husband. It could be a circumstance that I'm in right now that it's just overwhelming me. Lord, the people who are here tonight, it's not by accident. Not by accident. This man comes to wrestle with Jacob, not by accident. This was God ordained. Jacob didn't go to this man. God came to Jacob. And Lord, you came to us tonight through the Bible, through the Word of God. I pray that we would respond accordingly. I pray that people wouldn't leave here unchanged. I pray that they would leave here changed by the Word of God and say, I need to trust God in this area. In this little tiny area, it's causing such a big problem in my life. Maybe it's health. Maybe it's a coworker. Maybe it's my car. Maybe it's my job. Maybe it's my singleness. Maybe it's my marriage. Maybe it's my singleness. Maybe it's my divorce. I don't know. You know. Man, God, it's like we are more like Jacob than we really want to think. We see him as a really bad guy. But in some ways, we're just like him. Bad. Lord, show us our weakness so we trust